Okay, today's lesson's for Trans-Neptunian objects, or TNOs, and comets. Again, I'm using a lot of material and recorded videos from Astronomy, Our Created Solar System by Spike Bizarus. And remember, he was previously engineer in the United States military space program. He entered that program as an atheist and an evolutionist. He left it as a creationist and a Christian. So today's outline is pretty simple. 3 points. What are you not being told about Pluto? And this is brand new footage of Pluto. What are you not being told about comets? And we'll conclude with our created solar system. So the first point, as we continue our final tour of the solar system, we are beyond the planet Neptune. So the objects in this region are called TNOs, which stands for Trans-Neptunian objects, and the most famous TNO is Pluto. Pluto was long considered the 9th planet, but the International Astronomical Union reclassified Pluto as a dwarf planet in 2006. So most of us going through high school, we thought Pluto was a planet, but 2006 they reclassified it as a dwarf planet. Now, Pluto was discovered in 1930 by astronomer Clyde Tombaugh. It was named by an 11-year-old Venetia Burney of Oxford, England. Now, for the reasons for Pluto being reclassified as a dwarf planet. A planet is an object that orbits the sun and is large enough to have a more circular orbit due to the force of its own gravity. I want to look at this picture here and notice Pluto's orbit is more elliptical, or it follows more of an oval-shaped path and a slightly elongated circle. All the other planets are more circular around the sun, but not Pluto. That's one reason they reclassified as a dwarf planet. 2, a planet also has to dominate the neighborhood around its orbit, and Pluto was demoted because it does not dominate its neighbor. Bodies that dominate their neighborhoods sweep up asteroids and comets and other debris, clearing a path along their orbit. Pluto's orbit does not do this, and it's a little untidier with its oval-shaped orbit. And the third reason, all true planets are far larger than their moons, and I'll show you. Pluto's largest moon, Charon, is a large moon. It's about half the size of Pluto. So those are the reasons they downgraded it. Now, Pluto is a small planet. It's so distant that it receives very little energy from the sun because the average distance from the sun is 40 times that of Earth's distance to the sun. So it's so far away from the sun it doesn't get the sun's energy. So the temperatures on Pluto average 388 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. Remember, we talked about Venus being warm, Mercury being warm on the sun side and very cold on the non-sun side. There's a 1,000-degree difference. Well, Pluto's different. It's so far away from the sun, the whole planet is 388 degrees below zero, which is negative 233 Celsius. And there's also a Kelvin, 400 degrees Kelvin. Absolute zero is 0 Kelvin, so it's very frigid. Now, in July 2015, the New Horizons spacecraft reached Pluto. And I'll play a short clip that Spike talks about.
In July 2015, the New Horizons spacecraft reached Pluto. For the first time in history, we could examine this tiny world. And the results have been spectacular. Before New Horizons arrived, our best photographs of Pluto weren't very good. But we did know that Pluto is small, that it isn't very dense, and it has a large moon named Charon, along with a few smaller moons. Based on these facts, secular scientists were confident that Pluto would be a cold, inactive world.
So for a world to be hot, there are 3 primary sources of heat. They are radioactive decay, tidal heating, and primordial heat. And according to secular models, Pluto should not have any of these sources of planetary heat because it's been out there for 4.5 billion years. First, Pluto cannot have much radioactive decay going on inside because radioactive elements are heavy, okay? And Pluto's not very dense. Therefore, it's mostly composed of lighter elements and not many radioactive elements. So there's very little heat being generated by radioactive decay. So we can eliminate that as a source of planetary heat. Second, Pluto does not experience tidal heating. Tidal heating requires objects to be squeezed and flexed by another object with significant mass. The New Horizons principal investigator said Pluto is in tidal equilibrium with its moon Charon. And they say there's no significant exchange of tidal energy anymore. So there is no heat energy source coming from tidal heating either. So we eliminate that. So this leads to what's called primordial heat. The heat left over when Pluto was formed, or what we say when God created it. But small objects heat very quickly. And Pluto is a tiny world. You can see the comparison of Pluto and its moon Charon next to Earth. Notice how small Pluto is next to Earth. In fact, if you look at Pluto, the top one, and compare it to the United States, it might be a fourth, a third of the U.S. Very tiny planet. Since Pluto is so small, it would have cooled off and lost all its primordial heat eons ago. Therefore, if Pluto were billions of years old, it should have no leftover heat today. And no new sources of heating either. But what did the secular scientists say? They said Pluto should be old, cold, and dead. And before New Horizons arrived, that's what secular scientists expected to find. But that is not what the spacecraft found. And here's a short clip that Spike will talk about on the New Horizon pictures and how the surface on Pluto looks very young.
When New Horizons began sending back photos, secular scientists were shocked. Pluto is not old, cold, and dead. It is a dynamic, geologically active place. Large sections of Pluto's surface are smooth and craterless. These regions are very young because there hasn't been enough time for craters to form in them. As one project scientist said, this is one of the youngest surfaces we've ever seen in the solar system. How young are these regions? Recent studies have calculated that their maximum age is 500,000 years. That's only 0.01% of the 4.5 billion years that Pluto is supposed to be. But even 500,000 is not the true age. That's the maximum age of these regions. So in reality, they could be much younger than that. In fact, as one scientist admitted, this could be only a week old, for all we know. Apparently, Pluto is resurfacing itself. It appears that this is happening by convection. Warm material is rising up from underneath in a process similar to a lava lamp. This was a huge surprise. As Alan Stern, the New Horizons principal investigator, said, Sputnik Planum, that's the region where the convection is happening, is one of the most amazing geological discoveries in 50-plus years of planetary exploration. And National Geographic commented, it's a geologically rapid process that scientists didn't exactly expect to see on a small freezing world that lives, on average, 40 times farther from the sun than Earth. But what's the energy source for this convection? How can Pluto still be geologically active after billions of years? It shouldn't be. As Alan Stern said, finding that Pluto is geologically active after 4.5 billion years, there's not big enough typeface to write that in. It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. It still looks young. We've already seen that radioactive decay can't explain this, nor can tidal heating. The only reasonable explanation for Pluto's geological activity is primordial heat, or leftover from its formation or creation. But that can only last for a short time. It cannot last for billions of years, and Pluto appears quite young. Here's a short clip from Spike describing why Pluto is young. It has recent mountain formation up to 11,000 feet. It has glaciers and even has dunes.
There are other indications of geological activity and youth. Pluto has mountain ranges, with some peaks reaching 11,000 feet high, similar in size to the Rocky Mountains. But these mountains are a mystery to scientists who believe in a long age for the solar system. First of all, they were formed recently. As one article said, the prominent mountains at the western margin of SP and the strange multi-kilometer high mound features to the south are both young geologically and presumably composed of relatively strong water ice-based geological materials. Their origin and what drove their formation so late in solar system history remain uncertain. What process formed these mountains? They are mostly made of frozen water, but at Pluto's temperature, water ice is as hard as rock. After billions of years, what would be the source of energy for thrusting all this material upwards, thousands of feet above the surface? Elsewhere on Pluto, there are glaciers made of frozen nitrogen. These appear to be young and actively flowing. As one article said, no one dared imagine such a thick and localized buildup of geologically young ices that even at 40 kelvins have enough viscosity to create local landforms. And there were other surprises too. These interesting features here have been named snakeskin terrain. In other locations, hundreds of dunes have been observed, but these dunes aren't made of sand. They're made of frozen methane. The dunes appear to be young. As an article in Nature said, hundreds of methane dunes nestle at the base of Pluto's mountains. The formations offer a surprise on a body with such a thin atmosphere. Until now, some researchers thought that Pluto's atmosphere, which is at 1/100,000th the pressure of Earth's, could not support winds strong enough to sculpt dunes, but the team's analysis shows otherwise. The dunes probably formed in the past 500,000 years, which means Pluto is a geologically active world. Again, 500,000 years is a maximum age, not an absolute age. At most, these dunes are probably only a few thousand years old. Maybe they're still being sculpted today.
Now let's get into Pluto's moons. We mentioned Charon. That's Pluto's largest moon. And when you compare Charon to Pluto, it's the largest moon in the solar system compared to the size of the world it's orbiting. And this moon defies secular planet formation scenarios. And secular scientists cannot explain how a large moon can orbit such a small world. Since Charon defies secular planet formation scenarios, and evolutionists can't explain how this large moon can orbit such a small world like Pluto, what is the usual evolutionary answer? Anyone know? Think about the previous lessons. What did we hear? A sound. Okay, I'll play it. You'll remember. In this clip, Spike will go on to explain how Charon is young due to its recent geological activity. So since they can't explain it, what do they resort to? Asteroid.
So the usual answer is that an asteroid hit Pluto early in its history and formed a cloud of debris from which Charon formed. But New Horizons revealed a number of mysteries about Charon. For scientists who believe in billions of years, it has some of the same problems that Pluto does. Much of its surface looks young, and there appears to be recent geological activity. As a NASA article said, mission scientists are surprised by the apparent lack of craters on Charon. Relatively few craters are visible, indicating a relatively young surface that has been reshaped by geologic activity. And as this article acknowledged, that Charon is so geologically complex, however, would seem to require a heat source for reshaping what would have otherwise been a heavily cratered surface. But from a secular perspective, geological activity on Charon makes no sense. Charon is much smaller than Pluto. Its volume is only 13% that of Pluto's. If Pluto should have cooled off long ago, how much more should Charon have done so? Yet apparently, it still contains leftover heat from its creation. If that was billions of years ago, this is a problem. But if that creation took place just thousands of years ago, then it's not surprising.
Along with Charon, Pluto has 4 other moons, and these moons are very small in comparison. If you look on the bottom of the screen, that's Charon, and that's 750 miles in diameter in comparison to the 4 other Pluto moons. First one is called Styx. It's about 10 miles by 5 miles. Kind of small, wouldn't you think? And the next moon is called Nix, and that is 30 miles by 20 miles by 19, 3 dimensions. And the third one is, and you can see it's kind of a tiny one, it's 12 by 5.6 miles. And the fourth one is Hydra, and it's 31 by 22 by 19. So Spike will explain how Pluto's moons rotate differently around the orbit of Pluto. And it's almost like God telling people, this is the only planet where all the moons rotate almost in a different way and different speeds. It's amazing. And they weren't expecting this. I'll play his clip.
Styx tumbles chaotically. When New Horizons flew by, this moon is rotating backwards relative to its orbit around Pluto. Kerberos rotates sideways. Hydra rotates sideways too, and very quickly. It spins once every 10 hours. Why are these moons like this? Some scientists want to explain all 5 moons, including Charon, as being the result of a giant collision. However, if they had all formed from a collision, they would all be made of roughly the same material. But the 4 smaller moons have different compositions than Pluto and Charon. And all 5 moons orbit Pluto in circular orbits, closely aligned with Pluto's equator. Their orbits around Pluto are more circular than Earth's orbit around the Sun. A collision wouldn't be expected to produce these orbits. Also, a collision would produce a lot of debris and also some smaller moons, but New Horizons didn't find it.
Interesting how they rotate around Pluto. And Pluto's moons look young. They're very bright, especially Nix and Hydra. But this brightness would not last for long. As one article states, how such bright surfaces can be maintained on Nix and Hydra over billions of years is puzzling, giving that a variety of external processes. And they are radiation darkening, transfer of darker material from Charon via impacts from the dark Kuiper belt, meteorites, etc., would each tend to darken and redden the surface of these satellites over time. Before the New Horizons arrived, many predictions were made about what we would find on Pluto. The secular predictions based on billions of years were wrong in almost every possible way. And what did we find instead on Pluto? As one article in Science Daily said, it's more dynamic and alive than Mars. The only planet that has more complex geology is the Earth. And there's a picture of the surface of Pluto. So, what you aren't being told about Pluto. Pluto's geologically active, and it shouldn't, according to secularists. It has convection. It's resurfacing itself. There are young mountains up to 11,000 feet. It has glaciers and dunes, and has a strange collection of moons. Pluto looks young, not billions of years old. And here's a summary clip.
Pluto is a delightfully bizarre world with a fascinating system of moons. It was first discovered in 1930, so for almost 6,000 years of history, no human even knew it existed. But it was out there the entire time, quietly waiting to be explored. A wonderful little system, consistent with the biblical account of creation.
As we approach the end of our tour of the solar system, we still need to discuss one last category of objects, and we will discuss comets. Now, when you see a picture like that, or a comet appearing in the sky, it can be a breathtaking sight. Anybody know when the last comet was in space? It happened this year. It was October 13th through 15th, comet C 2023 A3, or they call it Comet A3, was visible in the evening sky. A3 was the brightest comet in 27 years. Comet Hale-Bopp was brighter in 1997. And they could see it, I think, mostly on the west coast. This next video will describe what comets are.
Comets are sometimes described as big, dirty ice balls. During most of its orbit, a comet doesn't look very exciting. But when it gets close enough to the sun, it heats up, and the ices begin to sublimate into gas. Gas and dust stream out beyond the comet, forming the beautiful tails that we can sometimes see from Earth. But there's more here than just beauty. A comet burns up and loses material each time it passes by the sun. It gets smaller and smaller each time. Eventually, it will break up into fragments. We've actually seen this process happen with several dozen comets now. Comets can also be lost by being thrown out of the solar system due to gravitational interaction with other objects. Or sometimes they're destroyed by crashing into something, like the sun or a planet. For example, in 1994, we saw fragments of the Shoemaker-Levy comet hit Jupiter. The impacts created prominent dark spots on the planet that lasted for months.
On the bottom.
So when you see a beautiful comet, enjoy its beauty while you can, because it will be temporary.
So I did want to explain there's two types of comets. Short period comets, which have a shorter orbital period around the sun, taking less than 200 years to complete one orbit. Most comets are short period comets. There's also long period comets that have a much longer orbital period, taking more than 200 years to complete one orbit. It goes deeper into space. A well-known example of a long period comet is the comet Hale-Bopp, which has an orbital period of about 2,500 years, making it a classic example of a comet that takes a very long time to orbit the sun once. Spike will explain how comets are challenging to secular scientists, and he'll introduce the term cometary nuclei.
This situation causes challenges for secular astronomers. Their models say that comets can only have formed back at the beginning of the solar system, billions of years ago. But a comet can only approach the sun so many times before it is either destroyed or leaves the solar system completely. Therefore, if the solar system were actually billions of years old, there must be a supply of new comets to replace the ones that are constantly being lost. So, secular astronomers believe that there are billions of comets, or comet nuclei as they're called, that are left over from the formation of the solar system. These nuclei orbit the sun at vast distances away. They've never been heated up by the sun. They've stayed out there, cold and frozen, for billions of years. It's only once in a while that something will disturb them, a star passing by our solar system, for example. The star will nudge them into orbits closer to the sun. At that point, they turn into normal comets with shortened lifespans.
So, where are the location of these cometary nuclei? Secular scientists believe there are several different locations for them, and several different reservoirs of nuclei. One is called the Oort cloud. Anyone hear that term at all? No? Okay. The other is the Kuiper belt, and the third is the scattered disk. Secular models need these sources to explain comets, but recent discoveries have challenged all of them, because they know that comets don't last long, so they have to have a reservoir of comets out there hidden, because it'll eject a new one, because we know that the universe is, or the solar system is 4.5 billion years, so there has to be a reservoir of comets that keep kicking into the solar system. Well, let's talk about this, and I'll let his video. We'll start with the so-called Oort cloud, and I call this evolution's rescuing device for comets, because comets can't live very long. They burn up in the sun, they go into outer space, or they'll, run into Jupiter. So they come up with this, and he'll explain it, the Oort cloud.
We'll start with the so-called Oort cloud, named after the astronomer who first invented this idea. He figured that there must be a huge reservoir of comet nuclei way out in a large, sphere-shaped cloud surrounding the solar system. The Oort cloud has three major problems. Number one, it's never been seen. As the late astronomer Carl Sagan wrote, many scientific papers are written each year about the Oort cloud, its properties, its origin, its evolution. Yet there is not yet a shred of direct observational evidence for its existence. Why hasn't anybody ever seen it? Because, according to secular models, it's impossible to see it or measure it because it's too far away. You just have to accept it on faith and believe it exists. Problem number two was discovered more recently. The secular model says that comets originally formed within the plane of the solar system out beyond Neptune in the TNO region. But the Oort cloud is supposedly much farther out than that and surrounds the sun in a huge sphere. How did all the comets get way out there? In other words, how was the Oort cloud populated? The story used to be that the comets migrated out there after they formed, but scientists now realize this is impossible. In this scenario, there would be a lot of collisions along the way, and very few nuclei would survive the trip. They'd be broken up instead. So the Oort cloud, even if it did exist, would have far too few cometary nuclei. It couldn't supply the comets that secular scientists need for their billions of years. Problem number three is that even if the Oort cloud existed, and even if it had somehow been populated with lots of cometary nuclei, at best, it could only explain long-period comets, comets that take a long time to go around the sun. This means that there are still a large number of comets that it can't explain. These are called short-period comets because they orbit the sun in a short period of time, 200 years or less. This is important because short-period comets have short lifespans. As we already discussed, comets can only approach the sun a certain number of times before they're destroyed or leave the solar system completely. The maximum lifespan of a typical short-period comet is much less than 100,000 years. Some could theoretically last a little longer, while others will be destroyed much more quickly. But none will last for billions or even millions of years, not even close. Therefore, if the solar system were really billions of years old, there must be a constant supply of new short-period comets to replace the old ones. Otherwise, we wouldn't see them anymore. However, scientists realized that even if the Oort cloud existed, it couldn't supply them. Short-period comets have orbits that make it impossible for them to have come from a spherical Oort cloud.
The next rescuing device for evolution for comets is the Kuiper belt and scattered disks, and he'll explain these in a short video.
The standard explanation was that they come from something called the Kuiper belt instead. This is supposed to be a disk of comet nuclei orbiting out beyond Neptune in the TNO region. Again, the story is that these have been sitting out there quietly for billions of years, but every once in a while, one of them gets disturbed, moves in closer to the sun, and turns into a comet. Therefore, says the secular astronomer, it's no problem that we still see short-period comets today. Yes, they only last for a few thousand years once they start orbiting closer to the sun, but there's an endless supply of them waiting out beyond Neptune. But then that explanation fell apart too. Among other problems, scientists realized that whatever objects are in the Kuiper belt region would be dynamically stable. In other words, it would be very difficult for anything to disturb them and change their orbits so that they'd become short-period comets. So then the story changed again. Today, the most popular explanation for short-period comets is called the scattered disk. There's supposed to be a different disk of objects out beyond the Kuiper belt, and it supposedly keeps the solar system supplied with short-period comets. But this doesn't work either. For the solar system to still have short-period comets after billions of years, the scattered disk has to have a certain amount of material in it, and observations show that this region of our solar system doesn't have it. In fact, it's insufficient by more than an order of magnitude. In other words, the scattered disk has less than 10% of the amount of mass required. So, astronomers who believe in billions of years can't explain how we can still see short-period comets today because they have no source that could keep supplying them.
Spike will also describe how 3 recent comets using observational science with measurements from spacecrafts don't match the secular models. According to their models, comets should only be made up of ice and what they call volatile elements. He'll talk about 3 comets. Comet Wild, it's spelled W-I-L-D but pronounced with a V. contains minerals that form at high temperatures, 5,000 degrees above Fahrenheit, and materials at very low temperatures. And this comet they call fire and ice, and they can't explain how that could form. The second comet is 67P, and it contains abundance of oxygen, molecular oxygen. But oxygen is extremely reactive to hydrogen. That's how you get H2O, water. So in the solar nebula, all the oxygen would have been used up immediately. And then the third is Comet Hartley 2, and that comet contains dry ice, or frozen carbon dioxide. According to their model, all these defy their beliefs of comets.
We're also discovering that comets themselves don't match these models either. Over the last few years, NASA and other space agencies have been busy studying comets, and we've even visited some with spacecraft. Comets are turning out to be very different than many astronomers expected. Remember, comets supposedly formed way out on the edge of the solar system. At that distance from the Sun, they should be made up of ices and frozen volatile elements. But then the Stardust spacecraft visited the Wild 2 comet. The probe actually flew through the comet's tail, collected material from it, and brought it back to Earth. It turns out that the comet does contain some volatile materials that, according to the model, could only have formed at very low temperatures, only 30 degrees above absolute zero. But at the same time, it also contains minerals such as osbornite, which forms at very high temperatures, 3,000 Kelvin, which is almost 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This comet is a bizarre mixture, a weird combination of materials formed from fire and ice. This does not match the secular model. Then there's Comet 67P. This comet contains an abundance of molecular oxygen. But oxygen in this form is extremely reactive with hydrogen. And in a solar nebula, hydrogen would have been the predominant gas. If this comet had formed in a solar nebula, all the oxygen would have been consumed immediately. But it still contains oxygen today. So apparently it didn't form in a solar nebula. From the secular perspective, this makes no sense. As one author said, current solar system formation models do not predict conditions that would allow this to occur. Another said, we had never thought that oxygen could survive for billions of years without combining with other substances. Maybe that's because this comet isn't really billions of years old. Another comet that we've studied closely is Comet Hartley 2. This comet contains a lot of dry ice, frozen carbon dioxide. And when we sent the Deep Impact spacecraft on a flyby, we found that the comet's nucleus is still outgassing. Now, it's not surprising that the dry ice is getting burned off by the sun. This will happen even at room temperature in a laboratory on Earth. But what doesn't make sense is for it to be doing this for billions of years, because the dry ice would have been burned off eons ago. As one article said, this discovery is inexplicable. The dry ice should have been gone a long time ago, but it's still there today. This comet looks very young.
So what you aren't being told about comets. There's problems with the Oort cloud. Long-period comets are supposed to come from an Oort cloud, but this idea has several problems. There's problems with the scattered disk. Short-period comets are supposed to come from the scattered disk, but this doesn't work either. No supply of short-period comets. If the solar system was really billions of years ago, short-period comets should not exist anymore, but they do. And observed comets defy the secular model. If the solar system was really old, the comets defy their model because it can't be that old. And then the observed comets that we see, the comet Wild had a combination of fire and ice. Comet 67P had abundance of molecular oxygen. And then Comet Hartley 2 contained dry ice and frozen carbon dioxide. So when we set probes out there, we showed that these comets can't be that old either. So, and you're probably not hearing about that in mainstream media. Oh, okay. So comets are more than just beautiful objects in the sky. They also reveal the failure of secular astronomy models. So in conclusion of our lesson on the created solar system, the planets, the moons, and other objects like comets have falsified evolutionary models over and over and over again. Doesn't matter if I talked about a planet, a moon, a comet, it all defied the evolutionary models. And we have seen so many things that shouldn't have magnetic fields, but they do. In fact, Christian scientists forecast that they would, and they were right. Also, planets and moons, after billions of years, shouldn't be geologically active, but they are. Planets that cannot have formed according to secular models, but exist anyway. Neptune is an example. In fact, one astrophysics textbook states, "We have seen that we know very little about the development of the solar system." Another evolutionary astronomer stated, "To sum up, I think that all suggested accounts of the solar system are subject to serious objections. The conclusion in the present state of the subject would be that the system cannot exist." So our created solar system, the best that evolutionary theory can come up with is the following: the system cannot exist. Next time you hear about some incredible discovery that confirms evolution, remember that you learned the past 3 lessons. Remember, you are never told the entire story about evolutionary models. Remember, they tell you they have it all figured out, when in reality, the system cannot exist. The more we learn about the solar system, the more we realize how bankrupt the evolutionary theory is. Meanwhile, the Bible has stood firm the entire time. The more we learn about astronomy, the more we wonder at the beauty and majesty of God's creation. And we can meditate on Psalm 19:1, which states, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork." Before I close, any questions or comments? Okay.
So what are comets actually made of, and how do they come into existence?
They call them dirty ice balls, and they're out beyond the solar system, and there's short period and long period, right? The short period rotate around. Sometimes they get kicked into our solar system, and some are just rotating for the last 200 years, and they just come in and out. And each time it goes around the sun, it dissipates until it breaks apart.
So they actually come from outside our solar system?
Especially the long period comet, yeah, like Hale-Bopp. They estimate that has 2,500 years in a rotation, but there's not many of them. The short period comets should not be lasting more than 10,000 years, and they're still out there. And we saw one just this October. Good question. Any others?
Does the Bible explain any of this? Or is it?
It does generally. Remember, the Bible just gives us guidance. We talked about that earlier, especially, the circle of the earth. The Bible talked about the earth was a sphere. The Bible also said the earth hangs on nothing. The Bible also talks about how God created. He made the stars also like no big deal, and there's 10 to the 20th power of stars out there, billions of galaxies, billions of stars in each galaxy, and he knows them all by name. And if you started counting all the stars out there, it would take you 100 trillion years to count one each second. But the Bible inferred, even before scientists of their day, remember, you could go outside and probably count the thousands of stars out there, and the Bible says they're like the sands of the seashore, numerous. But scientists of the Old Testament day could have said, well, the Bible's wrong because we can count them. But they didn't know that there's galaxies and stars beyond what we can see. And our telescope can't even see. Every time they go deeper and deeper into the universe, they find more and more galaxies. Yeah, yeah. So I will end with some quiz questions. Hopefully they're not too hard. And I do have some leftover books. Who hasn't gotten one? Here's your opportunity to answer a question and get a book. So question number 1. Evolution predicted Pluto should not be geologically active. Based on observational science, is Pluto geologically active today? Okay, good. Can you give me an example of why? There you go. Yep. Yep, very good. The recent mountains, the resurfacing of the surface, the glaciers and the dunes. Yep. Excellent, Hallinson. Okay, number 2. What's the name of Pluto's largest moon? Oh, wow, that was easy. What are the other 4? Yep. Yep. Yes. Okay, you got them all. Total of 5. Question 3. Evolution predicted comets formed billions of years ago. Why do they not last this long? Why do comets not last billions of years? Okay. What was that, Michelle?
If they're active, they're geologically active? Kinda.
Yeah, that's the main point. Yep. Remember, they're big, dirty ice balls in space. Each time a comet orbits the sun, it burns up and loses material.
That's because the sun is so hot.
Yep, and it's melting it.
Question to you. Some of them came out of our solar system, but they are probably in our galaxy, right? So is their order systems similar to the solar system in our galaxy?
Yes, but we haven't sent a spacecraft much beyond our galaxy after all these generations. And when I start talking about distant starlight, we'll get into that more detail. We've never measured outer space beyond our solar system. So we really don't know, like, how fast does light travel outside our solar system, 'cause gravity impacts it.
Well, we can send them out, but we can't expect them to come back.
Yeah, right. Yeah, one space probe was sent in the 70s, and it just reached, like,
It ain't like Star Trek.
right. Yeah, we'll get into that too. Okay, good answer. The last question, why do those observed comets, when they sent a space probe, a flyby, and they found out that they had different ingredients, why do they defy the evolutionary model?
Well, they're still releasing, or the dry ice is still releasing.
Yep, dry ice, oxygen, and there was one that was fire and ice, where it was created with extreme heat and extreme cold, and they can't explain it. Good, Peter. Okay.
Well, but man is so smart, why can't they explain it?
Asteroids, they're saving mechanism to explain what they can't explain.
Yeah,
It's
I
crazy.
know that, but they think they know everything.
but they don't.
They don't.
And as we know, the Bible teaches secular man suppresses the truth in unrighteousness. They don't want a creator, so they'll try to come up with mechanisms, rescuing devices is the term, to avoid believing in God.
Well, science explains it, why do you need God in their mind?
Yeah, right. So that concludes our stroll through the solar system. Next week we'll talk Big Bang and exploding the myth. And the Big Bang model has a lot of Christians have bought into this, which causes them to be old age believers. Hopefully after this lesson you'll see the problems it has. It has significant problems.